Heaven didn't come down to Münster. Hell rose up. In the year 1534, a quiet German town became the center of one of the most violent religious uprisings Europe had ever seen. It wasn't led by kings or armies. It was led by a preacher with a God complex and a tailor who thought he was the Messiah. This is the story of when a group of radical Anabaptists seized control of Münster, declared it the New Jerusalem, and plunged the city into a nightmare of polygamy, starvation, torture, and public execution, all in the name of God. This is not a parable. This happened. And it ended in a bloodbath so savage, they hung the bodies in iron cages as a warning for centuries. Let's go back to the beginning. Europe in the early 1500s was already a powder keg. Martin Luther had nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in 1517, shattering the Catholic Church's monopoly on salvation. Protestant sects began to sprout like weeds, and not all were preaching peace and forgiveness. The Anabaptists stood out. They rejected infant baptism. They believed the end of the world was imminent, and many believed that divine justice could and should be delivered by force. Enter Bernhard Rothman, a radical preacher from Münster. He wasn't always extreme, but as tensions grew, so did his message. He began calling the Pope the Antichrist, the Catholic Church the whore of Babylon, and Münster the prophesied New Zion, and people listened. The city was ready for change. But it wasn't Rothman who lit the fuse. That was Jan Matthys, a baker-turned-prophet from the Netherlands who claimed he was the reincarnation of Enoch and a direct messenger of God. Matthys told his followers to flee the godless world and gather in Münster. This wasn't a suggestion, it was divine command. And thousands obeyed. Men, women, and children poured into the city, swelling its population until it could no longer breathe. Münster's existing government collapsed. Catholic priests were expelled, Lutheran preachers were silenced. The printing presses were seized. Dissent was declared heresy. Rothman and Matthys ruled in unison, fire and brimstone, declaring that the kingdom of God had begun. Then came the purge. Private property was outlawed. All books except the Bible were burned, the streets filled with the smoke of literature. Gold and silver were confiscated. Markets were abolished. The economy vanished overnight. Soon after, Matthys declared that polygamy was not just allowed, it was required. God, he claimed, had revealed that all men could take multiple wives. Women who refused were imprisoned or executed. Teenage girls were forced into marriages with men 4 times their age. Some resisted. Most were broken.
And still it got worse. Matthys ruled through terror. Dissenters were drowned in the town square, called the Second Baptism. Heads were put on spikes, bodies left to rot as examples. Children were taught not to ask questions, only to obey. Then came Easter Sunday, 1534. Matthys said God had spoken to him directly. He was to personally ride out and destroy the bishop's army surrounding the city, with just a few men. He mounted a horse like a martyr and charged the enemy camp. He was dead within minutes. They cut him to pieces, placed his head on a pike, and sent the remains back to Münster.
And yet, the cult didn't collapse.
It calcified.
A new leader stepped forward, a man more theatrical and more sadistic than the last.
Jan van Leyden, a former tailor with a flair for drama, Jan crowned himself King of the New Jerusalem. Literally. He wore golden robes, a jewel-studded scepter, and sat on a throne like a Renaissance pharaoh. He claimed to receive visions from God. He created a royal court. He divided the city into castes. His elite guard, with the Oath Brothers, enforced his decrees with sabers and ropes. He mandated forced polygamy again, with himself as chief benefactor. He personally took over a dozen wives. One of them, Elizabeth Wandschurer, dared to criticize him for the suffering in the city. He dragged her into the square and, in front of the entire city, cut off her head with a sword. The crowd was forced to cheer. The surviving wives were ordered to dance around her corpse. Outside the walls, the Catholic bishop and his mercenary army maintained a brutal siege. No food entered, no one left. Inside, starvation set in. Bread ran out, then meat, then dogs, then rats. Eventually, people began boiling leather shoes, scraping bark from trees, chewing on grass. Infants cried themselves to death. Mothers went mad. The holy city had become a cemetery with walls. But still Jan van Leyden promised salvation. God would deliver them, any day now. He held nightly feasts for his court, while his people starved. He drank from golden cups while children died in the street. He claimed the suffering was a test, and that paradise was just on the horizon. Some believed, others didn't dare speak. By early 1535, the city was on the edge of collapse. Morale had turned to dust. The dead outnumbered the living, and then finally, the bishop's army breached the gates. What they found inside was worse than their darkest fears. The once beautiful city was a rotting hellscape.
Naked corpses lined the alleyways.
Bones jutted from mass graves. Women, barely alive, crawled through sewage. Children sat next to the bodies of their parents, whispering to ghosts. Jan van Leyden was captured in his royal chamber. He was not executed immediately. The bishop wanted a lesson. Jan and his top 2 lieutenants were taken to the center of town and chained in front of a massive crowd. For over an hour, they were torn apart with red-hot pincers, their flesh ripped from their bones inch by inch. Their screams were described as inhuman.
Only then were they stabbed in the heart.
But death wasn't the end. Their bodies were stuffed into iron cages and hung from the tower of St. Lambert's Church as a permanent warning. The cages are still there. Empty, rusted, but untouched. Staring down over the city that tried to play God and bled for it. Münster was never the same. The survivors were broken. The city was depopulated and spiritually gutted. For centuries, the name Münster was synonymous with madness and mass delusion. But this isn't just a relic of the past. This is a cautionary tale, because Jan Mathis didn't start by killing. He started by preaching. He promised purity, justice, a better world.
And people believed him.
But belief, when unchecked, becomes poison. When a man claims to speak for God and no one can challenge him, he becomes God in the eyes of the desperate. And desperation will make good people do horrific things. It didn't start as a death cult. It started as a movement, a rejection of corruption,
A cry for salvation.
But when the line between faith and fanaticism is erased, when doubt becomes treason, when obedience becomes virtue, then you haven't built a kingdom of heaven.
You've built a machine of death.
And all it takes is one prophet, with a hunger for power and a city willing to believe.